Have you ever wondered what happens to the children whose cries go unanswered? In Salem, Massachusetts, a former nurse turned delivery driver disappeared on Halloween night while making one final stop, a package with a chilling handwritten note. "For my daughter, please ring the bell. She hasn't left the basement since October 2018. The doorbell camera captured his last moments, a man hesitating at the threshold of an abandoned house, turning suddenly as if hearing a voice behind him, then vanishing without a trace. What Detective Sarah Haynes discovers in her investigation will challenge everything she believes about grief, guilt, and the thin veil between the lost and the found. Some doors, once opened, can never truly close, and some deliveries cross boundaries we don't understand, carrying whispers from forgotten children whose names still hold power in the dark. If you want to discover what really happened that rainy Halloween night, and why 7 small handprints were found etched into a basement wall, follow this channel now. Like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because this story might just change how you see the shadows in your own home. The dashboard clock read 10:48 p.m. as Ethan Doyle's trembling fingers tightened around the steering wheel of his weathered Honda Civic. Rain pattered softly against the windshield, creating hypnotic rivers that distorted the glow of Salem's Halloween decorations. At 32, with dark circles under his eyes and a 3-day stubble, Ethan looked much older than his years. "Last delivery of the night," he whispered to himself, glancing at the small cardboard box on the passenger seat. The handwritten label made his stomach tighten. "For my daughter, please ring the bell. She hasn't left the basement since October 2018. 7 years as a pediatric nurse had taught him to recognize pain hidden in simple words. 7 years before he'd broken, before the nightmares started. Now, late-night deliveries were all he could manage. The rain intensified as he turned onto Lafayette Street, squinting through foggy windows at house numbers. His GPS had gone blank several minutes ago, the screen flashing "no service" in an area where that never happened. The street was eerily quiet for Halloween night. No trick-or-treaters, no laughing families, just empty sidewalks glistening under street lamps. Number 119 appeared suddenly through the mist, a Victorian-style home with peeling paint and windows like hollow eyes. No lights shone from within. The front yard was overgrown, fallen leaves forming a sodden carpet that had clearly been undisturbed for seasons. Yet the delivery request had come through just an hour ago, paid with a generous tip. Ethan parked and checked his phone. The delivery app showed the customer's name simply as L. No profile picture, no delivery instructions beyond the handwritten note. His thumb hovered over the customer unavailable button. One tap, and he could mark this completed, drive away, forget the box and its strange message. But something kept him from pressing it. The same something that had made him leave nursing after losing little Grace Matthews 3 years ago. The feeling that a child needed help, and he was the only one listening. The doorbell camera activated silently as Ethan approached, its red light blinking in the darkness. The small box felt inexplicably heavy in his hands. Standing beneath the sagging porch roof, he drew a deep breath and pressed the doorbell. A hollow, metallic chime echoed inside, followed by complete silence. Ethan waited, counting seconds, raindrops sliding down his neck. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing. He was turning to leave when a small voice came through what must have been an ancient intercom system, crackling with static. "Mr. Did you bring Mommy's candy?" The voice froze him in place. High-pitched, childlike, but with a strange flatness that raised goosebumps along his arms. He cleared his throat, leaning closer to what looked like a speaker grill beside the doorbell. "Yes," he answered, his voice unsteady. "I have a delivery for this address." More silence, then a faint sound, the unmistakable rattling of chains being dragged across a floor, followed by a quiet sob. The voice returned, closer now, as though the speaker had moved to just behind the door. "You can come in. The door is open. Mommy said someone would come." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Every instinct told him to leave the package and go. But the nurse in him, the part that still woke up sweating from dreams of Grace's empty hospital bed, wouldn't let him walk away from a child who sounded frightened and alone. He tried the handle. It turned easily, the door swinging inward with a low, prolonged creak. Inside was darkness so complete it seemed to push back against the porch light behind him. "Hello?" Ethan called, 1 foot over the threshold. "I'm just going to leave the package here, okay?" The doorbell camera captured his hesitation, the moment he squinted to see through the dusty darkness of the entryway. It recorded how he took a cautious step forward, the small package clutched protectively against his chest. What it didn't capture was the sound that made Ethan turn suddenly. A soft padding of bare feet on hardwood, coming not from inside the house, but from somewhere behind him on the porch. The camera only showed his expression changing to one of confusion, then recognition, then something like deep, heartbreaking understanding. "Grace?" he whispered, the name barely audible on the recording. The camera caught him stepping backward, out of the frame, as though following something unseen. Then nothing but the empty porch, the open door, and the small box sitting forgotten on the welcome mat, its ribbon fluttering in a breeze that hadn't been there moments before. At precisely 10:53 p.m., 5 minutes after Ethan had arrived at the house, the doorbell camera's night vision captured one final anomaly, a small handprint appearing on the lens, as though someone were reaching up to touch it. Then the feed went black. Ethan Doyle was never seen again. But the delivery, according to the app's system, was marked completed at midnight by a user who had already logged out. The morning sun struggled to penetrate the thick fog that blanketed Salem, casting an eerie glow over the Halloween decorations now drooping from overnight rain. Inside the bustling headquarters of Deliver Quick, Regional Manager Thomas Reed stared at his computer screen with growing concern. An urgent notification flashed red. Driver 8294, delivery incomplete, last GPS signal, Lafayette Street, 10:48 p.m. Thomas tapped nervously at his keyboard. Ethan Doyle had been one of his most reliable drivers, punctual, professional, with a perfect completion record spanning 18 months. Until now. "Tried calling him again?" asked Melissa from dispatch, leaning over Thomas's cubicle wall, a coffee mug clutched in her hands. 5 times, straight to voicemail. Thomas ran a hand through his thinning hair. "His car tracker shows it's still somewhere on Lafayette. Hasn't moved since last night." Melissa frowned. "That's not like Ethan. Man so reliable he makes the postal service look lazy." Thomas nodded, thinking about the quiet, intense ex-nurse who preferred night shifts and rarely spoke about his past. The few times they'd had meaningful conversation, Ethan had mentioned working with children before a situation changed everything. Thomas had never pried further. "I'm calling the police," he decided, reaching for his phone. "Something's off." 2 hours later, Officer Ryan Daniels found Ethan's Honda parked 2 blocks from 119 Lafayette Street. The engine was still warm, suggesting it had been running recently or all night with the heater on. Ethan's phone lay on the passenger seat, the delivery app still open, with the final destination blinking. A half-empty coffee cup sat in the cup holder. Lipstick from a previous sip dried on its rim. But of Ethan himself, there was no sign. By afternoon, the case had landed on Detective Sarah Haynes's desk. At 43, with 15 years on the force, Sarah had developed a reputation for finding what others missed. Divorced, with premature streaks of silver in her dark hair, she lived for her work, particularly cases involving children. "So what do we have?" she asked, scanning the initial report while her partner, Detective Marcus Powell, pulled up footage on his laptop. "Delivery driver disappears during final stop of the night. Halloween, Lafayette Street. Customer claims they never received their package," Marcus summarized. "Here's the interesting part. We pulled the doorbell camera footage." Sarah leaned forward as the video began playing. The timestamp showed 10:48 p.m. She watched intently as Ethan Doyle approached the door, package in hand. The audio was surprisingly clear despite the rainfall. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Pause it." Marcus froze the frame. Sarah pointed to the moment just before Ethan turned away from the door. "Look at his posture. He's bending slightly, like he's listening to someone behind him." She squinted at the screen. And there, in the window, play it at half speed. As the footage continued slowly, a shadow moved across the distant window. Small, fleeting, impossible to identify definitively. "Could be anything," Marcus said skeptically. "Cat, reflection, tree branch." Sarah shook her head. "Too deliberate." She tapped the screen where Ethan's expression had changed. He recognized whatever he saw. "Look at his face. That's not fear. That's recognition." She stood abruptly. "I want to see this house." The address, 119 Lafayette Street, proved more troubling than expected. County records showed it had been officially vacant since 2019, when the previous owners, the Myers family, had abandoned it following a traumatic home invasion. More concerning, the property had been condemned 6 months ago due to structural damage. Yet someone had placed a delivery order from that address last night. Sarah stood on the same porch where Ethan had disappeared 18 hours earlier. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze. The door, now forced open by the initial responding officers, revealed a musty interior thick with dust and abandonment. "Nobody's lived here for years," Marcus commented, shining his flashlight across cobweb-draped furniture. Sarah moved deliberately through the house, her trained eyes cataloging details. In the kitchen, dishes sat in the sink as though someone had simply walked away one day. A calendar on the wall remained open to October 2018. "The basement," she said quietly. The note mentioned a basement. The basement door resisted, then yielded with a groan. Sarah descended carefully, each step creaking beneath her weight. Her flashlight beam cut through darkness, revealing a space that felt colder than the rest of the house. In the center of the room sat a small table with a headless doll propped in a child's chair. Beside it, a chipped bowl contained what appeared to be candy, now fuzzy with mold, suggesting years of neglect. The walls were covered with childish drawings of stick figures, a woman, a child, and a tall shadow with no face. Sarah approached the far wall, where a single photograph hung crookedly. She lifted it carefully, a young girl with braided hair, solemn eyes, and a forced smile. Written beneath in faded marker, "Lydia, 2018. "Marcus," she called, her voice tight. "We need to pull everything we have on the Myers family and find out if they had a daughter named Lydia." As they prepared to leave, Sarah noticed something caught in the door jamb, a small slip of paper, partially visible. She tugged it free, a delivery receipt, printed with last night's date. The customer signature line bore Ethan Doyle's hasty scrawl, but in the field marked recipient, someone had written in blue ink that didn't match Ethan's signature. "The delivery never ends." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the basement's temperature. She slipped the receipt into an evidence bag, her mind already forming connections that logic insisted couldn't exist. Outside, as crime scene technicians arrived to process the house, Sarah stood on the sidewalk, studying the property. Something about the girl in the photograph nagged at her, not just the sadness in those young eyes, but a strange sense of familiarity. Her phone buzzed with a text from the station. Background on Doyle arrived. Former pediatric nurse. Left profession after losing patient to parental abduction. Patient's name, Grace Matthews, age 8. Sarah looked back at the house, pieces of an impossible puzzle beginning to align. "What happened to you, Ethan?" she whispered. "What did you see here?" Behind her, unnoticed, the front door of 119 Lafayette Street, which the officers had propped open with a doorstop, quietly closed itself. The search for Ethan Doyle entered its second day with a somber intensity that permeated the Salem Police Department. Outside, the post-Halloween cleanup crews removed sagging decorations, while inside, Detective Sarah Haynes pinned photos to the incident board. Ethan's driver's license picture on one side, the mysterious house on Lafayette Street on the other, connected by red string and question marks. "What do we know about him?" she asked, addressing the small team assembled in the conference room. Coffee cups littered the table, evidence of a long night. Officer Jenkins consulted his notes. Ethan Michael Doyle, 32, no criminal record, worked as a pediatric nurse at Salem Memorial for 7 years before resigning in 2022. Started driving deliveries about 18 months ago. Lives alone in an apartment on Essex Street. No immediate family in the area. Sarah studied Ethan's photograph. A man with kind eyes that carried a weight she recognized all too well. The resignation from nursing. What prompted it? Jenkins hesitated. That's where things get complicated. There was an incident involving a child abduction from the hospital. 8-year-old Grace Matthews was recovering from appendicitis when her non-custodial father took her from the pediatric ward during Ethan's shift. The father had a history of domestic violence. Sarah felt a tightening in her chest. What happened to Grace? Found dead 3 days later at a motel outside Boston. Father committed suicide at the scene. Jenkins lowered his voice. Ethan was cleared of any negligence, but according to his former colleagues, he never forgave himself. Started having panic attacks on the ward, couldn't sleep, eventually resigned. The room fell silent as the weight of this history settled over them. "I want to see his apartment," Sarah decided. Ethan's apartment was small but meticulously organized, a stark contrast to the chaos of his disappearance. Located above a used bookstore on Salem's historic Essex Street, the studio space felt more like a way station than a home. No photographs adorned the walls. No plants flourished on windowsills. Everything was functional, temporary. Sarah moved through the space with careful attention. The refrigerator contained only basics. Milk, now spoiling, half a sandwich, and several energy drinks. A small table by the window held an open laptop and a stack of delivery receipts. organized by date. The bathroom cabinet revealed more: prescription bottles for anxiety medication, sleeping pills, and a therapist's business card with Tuesday 2 p.m. written on the back. Several appointments had been marked canceled in red pen. "Look at this," Marcus called from beside Ethan's bed. He held up a framed photograph, the only personal touch in the entire apartment. It showed a young girl with a bright smile wearing a hospital gown decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. Written across the bottom, "To the best nurse in the world. Love, Grace." Sarah took the photo gently. He kept her with him. On the desk, Ethan's laptop hummed quietly. With the department's tech specialist present, they opened it to find no password protection. Unusual in itself. He wasn't hiding anything, Marcus observed. The desktop contained surprisingly little: delivery schedules, a few ebooks on mindfulness, and a folder simply labeled "Unfinished." Inside were subfolders containing records of deliveries that, for various reasons, Ethan had been unable to complete. Wrong addresses, customers unavailable, packages damaged. The most recent subfolder caught Sarah's attention immediately. Lydia 1119 Lafayette. Inside was a single document, a typed note that made Sarah's skin prickle. "I've seen her 3 times now. Always in my rearview mirror, always at night. A girl with braids, wearing the same blue dress, following me. Last night she left a drawing on my windshield, a house with a basement and someone waiting inside. The address was written in a child's handwriting, 119 Lafayette. I looked it up. A family lived there until 2018. Then something happened, something no one talks about. I requested the delivery route for that neighborhood tonight. If she appears again, I'll know it wasn't just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind." The note was dated October 30th, the day before Ethan disappeared. "He went looking for her," Sarah whispered, a chill running through her. But who was he really looking for? Lydia or Grace? As Sarah left Ethan's apartment, her phone rang. It was the station. "Detective Haynes? There's someone here you need to speak with. Says her name is Michelle Matthews, Grace's mother." 20 minutes later, Sarah sat across from a woman whose grief had carved permanent lines around her eyes. Michelle Matthews clutched a small cardboard box in trembling hands. "I don't know if this helps," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious distress. "But when I heard about Ethan on the news, I remembered this. He left it at the clinic where I work. I'm a receptionist at Salem Wellness Center now. Said he might need me to hold it for him, just for a few days. That was last week." She pushed the box across the table. "I never opened it." Sarah carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay several sealed envelopes, each addressed simply to "A child who couldn't be saved." The handwriting matched Ethan's delivery receipts. "Did Ethan stay in contact with you after what happened to Grace?" Sarah asked gently. Michelle nodded, wiping away a tear. "He brought flowers on her birthday every year. Blamed himself, though it wasn't his fault. My ex-husband was determined." She paused, collecting herself. Ethan was different from the other hospital staff. He remembered the little things. Grace loved strawberry jello, hated grape, was afraid of thunderstorms. He'd sit with her during night shifts when she couldn't sleep. Did he ever mention other children? Perhaps a girl named Lydia? Michelle frowned, thinking. Not specifically. But about 2 months ago, he seemed preoccupied. Asked me if I ever felt like Grace was still trying to tell me something. Her voice broke slightly. I thought he was just processing his own trauma. Now I wonder. Sarah opened one of the sealed envelopes with gloved hands, unfolding the letter inside. I still hear you at night, calling from places I can't reach. I promised I'd keep you safe, and I failed. But if you're still out there somewhere, still waiting, I'll find you this time. Some doors once opened can never truly close. Sarah looked up from the letter, meeting Michelle's tearful gaze. He was searching for something, Sarah said quietly. Or someone. Or running from something, Michelle added, her expression hardening. Ethan wasn't just a caring nurse detective. He had what some of the parents called the sight. He could tell when children were in pain even before they showed symptoms. The staff joked that he had a sixth sense. She leaned forward. What if he saw something that night? Something at that house? As Sarah drove back to the station, the questions multiplied. Who was Ethan Doyle trying to save that Halloween night? Lydia, Grace, or himself? And why did he believe the answer waited in a basement where no one had lived for years? The rain began again as darkness fell over Salem, washing away the last remnants of Halloween festivities and leaving behind only whispers of stories too strange to believe, yet too consistent to ignore. The soft chime of the station's front desk bell pulled Detective Sarah Haynes from her thoughts. She had been staring at the evidence board for nearly an hour, connecting threads between Ethan's past and his disappearance until her vision blurred. 3 days had passed with no sign of the missing delivery driver. "Detective?" Officer Reyes appeared in the doorway. "There's an elderly woman at the front desk. Says she has information about 119 Lafayette." Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and nodded. "I'll be right there." In the lobby sat a woman who embodied fragile dignity. At least 70, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and a weathered face that spoke of decades of New England winters. She clutched a worn leather handbag in gloved hands. Her back was ramrod straight despite her age, her eyes sharp and clear. "Mrs. Helen Miller," she introduced herself, her handshake surprisingly firm. "I've lived on Lafayette Street for 43 years. Number 132. Sarah led her to a quieter interview room, noting how Mrs. Miller's gaze darted nervously around the station, as though expecting to be overheard. "I saw him," Mrs. Miller said once they were seated, voice barely above a whisper. "The young man on the news. The delivery driver." "You saw Ethan Doyle?" Sarah leaned forward, pulse quickening. "When?" "Halloween night." Mrs. Miller's hands trembled slightly as she opened her purse, removing a small notebook. "I keep track of unusual occurrences on our street. Have done since my Herald passed in '07. Neighborhood watch coordinator, you understand." She flipped the notebook open to a recent entry. 10:52 p.m. Man standing in rain at 119, holding something to his chest. Crying. Sarah felt a chill. The timestamp aligned perfectly with the doorbell camera footage. "Did you see where he went after that?" Mrs. Miller shook her head, lips pressed into a thin line. "I was about to call out to him. Thought maybe he was lost or unwell. But then..." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether to continue. "Then what, Mrs. Miller?" Sarah prompted gently. He looked up suddenly, like someone had called his name. The older woman's voice dropped even lower. "There was nobody else on the street, Detective. Not a soul. But he smiled, such a sad smile, and walked toward something I couldn't see." Her weathered fingers clutched at the cross hanging around her neck. Then he was gone, like he'd walked right through a doorway that wasn't there. Sarah carefully noted everything, maintaining her professional composure despite the eerie account. "Mrs. Miller, what can you tell me about the house at 119? About the family that lived there?" Something darkened in the elderly woman's eyes. "The Myers family. Richard, Caroline, and little Lydia. Kept to themselves mostly. Richard worked nights at the paper mill. Caroline was troubled. Beautiful woman, but there was something broken in her. The way she'd look at you sometimes, like she was seeing something else entirely. And Lydia? Sweet child. 7 or 8 when they moved in. Always reading books on the porch steps. Braids usually, with blue ribbons." Mrs. Miller paused, swallowing hard. "Until she wasn't there anymore. What happened to her? Nobody knows for certain. The official story was that Caroline took her to stay with relatives after the parents separated. But that wasn't true." Mrs. Miller leaned closer, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "In the summer of 2018, I started hearing things at night. Crying. Sometimes screaming. A woman's voice begging someone to let her out. At first, I thought it was just domestic troubles. God knows that's common enough. But then I realized the cries were coming from their basement." Sarah felt the hair on her arms rise. "Did you call the police?" 3 times. Bitterness edged Mrs. Miller's voice. "They came, spoke to Richard and Caroline together. Everything seemed normal, they said. Just a family going through a rough patch. But after each visit, the screaming got worse." Her gnarled hands twisted in her lap. "The last time I heard it was October 31st, 2018. Halloween. The screaming went on for hours. Then suddenly, nothing. 3 days later, moving vans came. The house has been empty ever since." Her eyes met Sarah's, filled with decades of guilt. "I should have done more." "What do you think happened that night?" Sarah asked carefully. Mrs. Miller's chin trembled. "I don't know, but I'll tell you this. Every Halloween since then, the lights in that basement turn on. Just for a few minutes around midnight. Nobody goes in, nobody comes out." She clutched her handbag tightly. "And sometimes, walking past on a quiet night, you can hear a child humming." After Mrs. Miller left, Sarah stood by the station window, watching rain streak the glass in crooked rivers. Her reflection stared back, fragmented and distorted. Something about this case felt deeply personal, as though the threads connecting Ethan to Lydia to Grace were somehow woven through her own life as well. She made a decision. The rain had intensified by the time Sarah returned to 119 Lafayette Street. Crime scene tape fluttered in the wind, a sad yellow banner against the darkening afternoon sky. She ducked underneath it, badge visible as a uniformed officer nodded from his post at the perimeter. "Just need another look," she explained, pulling her coat tighter against the chill. This time, she noticed things she'd overlooked before. Fresh tire marks in the muddy driveway, partially washed away by rain but still visible. Made after Ethan's disappearance, after the police had processed the scene. Footprints on the porch steps, adult-sized leading in, but alongside them, smaller prints that seemed to lead out. And the candy box, which had been photographed on the doorstep, was now empty. Inside, the house felt different. The previous emptiness had been replaced with something Sarah could only describe as expectancy, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. A window in the back hall had been broken since her last visit. Jagged glass on the inside suggested it had been broken from outside. Sarah moved cautiously down the hall, following a trail of wet footprints that glistened in her flashlight beam. They led to the basement door, which now stood slightly ajar. Drawing her service weapon, she pushed the door open with her shoulder. "Police. Anyone down there, identify yourself." Only silence answered. The basement stairs creaked under her weight as she descended slowly, flashlight sweeping across the darkness. The headless doll still sat at the small table, but it had been moved slightly, positioned as though looking toward the stairs. The moldy candy bowl was now empty, and on the far wall something new. Words written in dark, dripping liquid that Sarah prayed was paint. "She's still here." Heart pounding, Sarah approached the wall, examining the writing. It was fresh, still glistening in the flashlight beam. Whoever had written it could not have left long ago. As she turned to call for backup, Sarah felt it. A presence, a shift in the air that raised goosebumps on her skin. Not threatening, but undeniably there. A scent lingered beneath the mustiness of the old house, something sweet, like strawberry candy. Her radio crackled to life suddenly, making her jump. But instead of dispatch, she heard only static, punctuated by what sounded like a child's voice, distant and distorted. "Did you bring Mommy's candy?" Sarah backed up the stairs quickly, radio still spitting fragments of broken sound. Outside in the patrol car, she tried to steady her breathing as she called in what she'd found. The forensics team would need to process the new evidence immediately. As she waited, she replayed Mrs. Miller's words in her mind. "He walked toward something I couldn't see." The thought settled over her like a shroud. What if Ethan hadn't been taken? What if he had followed willingly, believing he was finally answering a call he'd been hearing for years? Through the rain-spattered windshield, Sarah watched the dark silhouette of 119 Lafayette Street. For just a moment, she thought she saw a small face peering from the basement window, gone when she blinked, leaving her to wonder if it had been there at all. The forensics lab hummed with quiet efficiency as Sarah stood watching technician Diane Morris analyze the handwriting from the candy box note. 4 days since Ethan's disappearance, and each new discovery only deepened the mystery. Outside, November rain lashed against the windows, turning the afternoon sky prematurely dark. "I've compared the samples 3 times, Diane said, looking up from her microscope with perplexed eyes. "There's no mistake. The handwriting on the note, 'For my daughter, please ring the bell. It's Ethan Doyle's.'" Sarah felt as though the floor had tilted beneath her. "That's impossible. The note was already on the package when he picked it up for delivery." Diane shook her head, sliding printed comparisons across the light table. "Pressure points, letter formation, spacing. It's all consistent with his delivery receipts and the letters you found in his apartment." She hesitated, tucking a strand of gray hair behind her ear. "But there's something else. The ink dating." Sarah leaned closer. "What about it?" "It's old. I can't give you an exact date without more specialized tests, but based on oxidation and degradation patterns, this ink has been on this paper for years. I'd estimate 2018, give or take a few months." Sarah's mind raced through implications. "You're saying Ethan wrote this note 7 years ago?" "That's what the evidence suggests," Diane replied, unable to hide the discomfort in her voice. "Which means he'd been to that house before," Sarah finished, the realization washing over her like ice water. She paced the small lab, trying to process this revelation. But why pretend he was making a delivery? Why the elaborate charade? Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Marcus. "Sarah, you need to get back here. The hospital records came through." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood before a new addition to the evidence board. a photocopied patient admission form from Salem Memorial Hospital, dated June 2018. The name at the top, Lydia Myers, age 8. Admitted for observation after a household accident, Marcus explained, finger tracing the documentation. Suspected abuse. Nurse's notes indicate multiple bruises in various healing stages. The attending physician was ready to call Child Protective Services. But they didn't, Sarah guessed, studying the form. Case was mysteriously dropped. Father came with a lawyer. Mother changed her story. Child was released back to parental custody within 48 hours. Marcus flipped to another page. Here's the kicker. The nurse who filed the initial report of suspected abuse? Ethan Doyle. Sarah felt the pieces shifting, a kaleidoscope slowly aligning into something recognizable. He knew her. He tried to help her before. There's more. Marcus pulled out another file. I checked Grace Matthews' records from when she was abducted. Guess which ward she was in? Pediatrics, obviously, Sarah said, not seeing the connection. Yes, but specifically, she was in room 302. He pointed to Lydia's admission form. Same room where Lydia had been staying 2 months earlier. Sarah leaned against the desk, mind working furiously. So, Ethan lost 2 vulnerable girls from the same room. First, Lydia, who was sent back to potential abusers despite his concerns. Then Grace, who was taken by her father and killed. She pressed her fingers to her temples. No wonder he couldn't continue nursing. The guilt must have been unbearable. She turned back to the evidence board, staring at the photos of both girls side by side. Similar ages, similar appearances, both with long brown hair often worn in braids. Both failed by systems meant to protect them. He was seeing ghosts, Sarah whispered. Not metaphorically, literally. Her phone buzzed with a text from the forensics team at 119 Lafayette. Basement writing sample not paint. Human blood. Preliminary type match to Ethan Doyle. Sarah felt her chest tighten. Marcus, I need to go back to the hospital. Now. Salem Memorial's pediatric ward was quieter than Sarah expected. The afternoon lull filling the corridors with an almost reverent hush. Children's artwork decorated the walls, cheerful attempts to brighten an inherently frightening place. Nurse manager Patricia Donnelly had been at Salem Memorial for over 20 years. Her silver-streaked black hair was pulled into a tight bun, her dark skin lined with the kind of wisdom that comes only from decades of witnessing both miracles and tragedies. Ethan was special, she said, as she led Sarah toward the records room. Had a gift with the difficult cases, the scared ones, the ones who wouldn't talk to anyone else. Children sense things, you know. They recognized something in him. What happened after Grace Matthews was taken? Sarah asked. Patricia's face tightened with old pain. He was destroyed by it, blamed himself entirely, started seeing threats everywhere, became convinced other children were in danger that only he could see. She sighed heavily. The hospital offered counseling, leave, anything to help. But he'd changed. Would come in on his days off to check on specific patients. Started keeping his own records, separate from official charts. Records of what? Children he was worried about. Ones who showed signs of abuse or neglect that couldn't be proven. Ones who claimed to see things. Imaginary friends, monsters under beds, that Ethan took more seriously than most would. Patricia stopped outside a storage room. After he left, I packed up his locker. Found this. From a filing cabinet, she withdrew a worn leather journal. I should have turned this in, but something told me to keep it, like someday someone would need to understand. Sarah took the journal carefully. The pages were filled with Ethan's neat handwriting, names, dates, observations that went far beyond medical notations. Some entries were circled in red, others connected with arrows and question marks. One page contained a list titled simply, The Lost Ones. Both Grace and Lydia's names appeared on the list, along with 5 others. He believed these children were connected somehow, Sarah said, flipping through the increasingly frantic notes. That they were calling to him? Patricia nodded grimly. The last few weeks before he left, he kept saying he could hear them at night. Not just the ones who had died, like Grace, but the ones who were just missing, lost between the cracks. She crossed her arms as if suddenly cold. I thought it was PTSD, honestly, but Ethan believed he was being chosen as some kind of messenger. Sarah turned to the final entry, dated October 29, 2022, the day before Ethan resigned. I saw Elle again tonight, standing at the foot of my bed. She left wet footprints on the floor that were gone by morning. She keeps showing me the same address, the same basement. Says others are there too, waiting. No one believes children, but I do. I've always heard them. Now I need to find them. Sarah closed the journal, a profound sadness washing over her. He wasn't crazy, was he? He was trying to save them, even after they were beyond saving. Patricia's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The night before Grace was taken, she told Ethan she was scared of a man watching her window. He reported it, but security found nothing. After she died, he never forgave himself for not believing her. On her way out, Sarah passed room 302. The door was ajar, the room currently empty between patients. Something compelled her to enter. Standard hospital furnishings greeted her: bed with rails, monitoring equipment, a small table, chairs for visitors. Cheerful animal decals decorated one wall, attempting to make the sterile environment less frightening for its young occupants. By the window, a child's drawing was taped to the glass, clearly left from a previous patient. Sarah moved closer to examine it. A crude crayon picture showed a stick figure girl with braids holding hands with a taller stick figure man. Behind them, a house with a dark shape in the basement window. Across the top in childish handwriting, "He promised he'd come back." Sarah photographed the drawing with trembling hands, then carefully removed it from the window. As she turned to leave, her phone rang. Michelle Matthews calling. "Detective, I found something else of Ethan's, a letter addressed to you." Sarah froze. "To me? But I never met him." "It's definitely addressed to Detective Sarah Haynes. He must have known you'd be the one to look for him." Outside, the November sky had darkened completely, rain turning to sleet that tapped against the hospital windows like impatient fingers. Sarah stared at the child's drawing, a deep chill settling in her bones that had nothing to do with the weather. "What does it say?" she asked, already knowing the answer would only deepen the mystery surrounding the man who had vanished on Halloween night, following voices only he could hear. The sealed envelope felt unnaturally heavy in Sarah's hands as she sat in her car outside Michelle Matthews' modest Cape Cod home. Rain drummed on the roof, creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The letter, addressed to her in Ethan's now familiar handwriting, remained unopened on her lap while she gathered her courage. "How did he know?" she whispered to the empty car. "How did he know I'd be the one investigating?" With a deep breath, she carefully broke the seal and unfolded the single page inside. "Detective Haynes, if you're reading this, I've followed her into the dark. I've seen your name in the papers. The detective who finds what others miss. The one who never stops looking for lost children. You'll understand why I had to go. There are places between worlds where forgotten children wait. Places where time bends around grief. 119. Lafayette is such a place. A door left ajar 7 years ago that never properly closed. Look in the basement. The answers are buried where they've always been. She's here, Sarah. I found her. But she's not a child anymore. Ethan." Sarah read the letter 3 times, trying to decipher meaning from the cryptic words. The familiarity with which he addressed her was unsettling, as if they were old friends rather than strangers. Yet something in his tone resonated with a part of her she rarely acknowledged. The drive that had pushed her into detective work 15 years ago, after her own sister had disappeared at 16, never to be found. She folded the letter carefully, tucking it into her jacket pocket. The connection between them suddenly felt less mysterious. Perhaps damaged people recognized each other across time and circumstance, kindred spirits drawn to the same wounds in the world. Night had fallen completely as Sarah drove back to 119 Lafayette Street. The house stood dark against the stormy sky, yellow police tape fluttering like tattered ribbons around its perimeter. 2 patrol officers nodded as she approached, their faces grim beneath the harsh glow of portable floodlights that had been set up around the property. "Forensics team left an hour ago," Officer Chen informed her, rain dripping from his cap. "They're processing the blood evidence from the basement wall. Preliminary match to Doyle, like we thought." Sarah nodded, pulling her raincoat tighter. "I need another look at the basement." "Alone." Chen hesitated. "Detective, with all due respect, something about this place..." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "The equipment keeps malfunctioning. Radios cutting out. Flashlights dying. Even the generator flickered twice for no reason." "I'll be careful," she assured him, already moving toward the house. The interior felt different at night, darker, more alive somehow. Sarah's flashlight cut through layers of shadows as she made her way to the basement door. Each footstep echoed on the wooden floors, answered by creaks from corners where nothing should be moving. The basement stairs groaned beneath her weight, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. At the bottom, her flashlight beam swept across the now familiar scene. The small table, the headless doll, the wall with its bloody message still visible under the evidence markers. "Look in the basement," Ethan had written. "The answers are buried where they've always been." Sarah surveyed the concrete floor carefully. In one corner, near the ancient coal furnace, the ground looked different, slightly uneven, the concrete newer than the surrounding floor. Moving closer, she noticed thin cracks around a roughly 4x4-foot section. Kneeling, she ran her fingers along the edge, feeling a slight draft where there shouldn't be one. Something metallic glinted in the seam, the corner of what appeared to be a small metal box, just barely visible where the newer concrete had cracked away. Sarah pulled a folding knife from her pocket and carefully pried at the exposed corner. The concrete crumbled surprisingly easily, revealing more of the metal container. 20 minutes of careful digging freed it completely. A dented metal lockbox, the kind used for important documents or valuables. The lock had long since rusted through. Sarah pried it open, heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Inside, protected by plastic sheeting, lay a collection of hospital identification badges, all belonging to children who had been patients at Salem Memorial's pediatric ward between 2017 and 2018. 7 badges in total, including ones for Grace Matthews and Lydia Myers. Each photo showed a solemn-faced child. Each badge had been marked with a small red X in the corner. Beneath the badges lay a stack of Polaroid photographs, children in hospital gowns, playing in a recreation room or sleeping in their beds. All appeared to have been taken without the subject's knowledge. The photographer's reflection was visible in one. Richard Myers, Lydia's father, wearing a maintenance uniform with the hospital logo. Sarah's blood ran cold as connections formed rapidly in her mind. She checked the dates on the hospital badges against Ethan's list of lost ones. Perfect matches. All 7 children had been patients in pediatrics. All had subsequently been reported as runaways, relocated with relatives, or victims of custody disputes. All had vanished without proper investigation. At the bottom of the box lay a single cassette tape, labeled simply, "Final Delivery," in what appeared to be fresh ink. Ethan's handwriting again. Sarah's hands trembled as she pocketed the tape. She needed to get this evidence to the station immediately. Just as she closed the box, her flashlight flickered, then died, plunging the basement into complete darkness. "Damn it," she muttered, reaching for her phone to use as a light. Before she could unlock it, a soft sound caught her attention. The unmistakable click of the basement door closing at the top of the stairs. Sarah froze, listening intently. Footsteps moved slowly across the floor above her head. Too heavy to be a child's, too deliberate to be an officer's routine check. "Officer Chen?" she called out, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Is that you up there?" No response came, but the footsteps continued, now directly overhead, moving in a path that seemed to trace the exact dimensions of the basement below. Then silence. Sarah drew her service weapon, the familiar weight providing little comfort in the absolute darkness. She began moving carefully toward the stairs, one hand extended to feel her way. Her phone buzzed suddenly, an incoming call from an unknown number. The screen illuminated, casting just enough light for her to see that she wasn't alone anymore. A small figure stood at the base of the stairs, indistinct in the dim blue light, but unmistakably child-sized. "Lydia?" Sarah whispered, her throat tight. The figure didn't move or speak. As Sarah's eyes adjusted, she realized it wasn't Lydia or Grace or any of the children from the hospital badges. It was the headless doll from the table, now somehow standing upright, blocking the only exit. Sarah's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with a new text message. From Ethan Doyle's number, which had been disconnected days ago. "She's here, Sarah. I found her, but she's not a child anymore." The doll toppled forward suddenly, hitting the concrete with a hollow thud that echoed through the basement. As if on cue, the overhead lights flickered to life, revealing the basement exactly as it had been, except for the metal box Sarah had unearthed, and a new detail she hadn't noticed before. On the far wall, partially hidden behind the ancient furnace, someone had scratched dozens of tiny handprints into the concrete. Below them, freshly carved, were the words, "The delivery never ends." The forensics lab would later confirm what Sarah already knew. The handprints matched the 7 missing children, and the blood used to write the message on the opposite wall contained DNA from 2 people, Ethan Doyle and a female relative of Richard Myers. The cassette tape, when finally played on an ancient recorder in the evidence room, contained only Ethan's voice, speaking as if from far away. "She's here, Sarah. I found her. But she's not a child anymore. She grew up waiting in the dark, forgotten by everyone except those who should have protected her. I'm going to bring her home now, even if I have to follow her through doors that were never meant to be opened." The recording ended with the sound of chains being dragged across a floor, followed by something heavy being slowly, deliberately dragged down a flight of stairs. The morning dawned with unexpected clarity after days of relentless rain. A pale November sun illuminated Salem's rain-washed streets, casting long shadows across brick buildings still draped with fading Halloween decorations. Detective Sarah Haynes stood by the window of the incident room, coffee cooling in her hand as she stared at the evidence board that had consumed her life for the past week. The ringing of her desk phone shattered the morning quiet. "Detective Haynes?" she answered, stifling a yawn. Sleep had become a distant memory since finding the metal box in the basement. "Detective, it's Officer Ramirez." The young patrolman's voice trembled slightly. "You need to come to South River near the old mill crossing. We found something." 30 minutes later, Sarah stood on the muddy riverbank, watching as dive team members carefully maneuvered a body bag onto a stretcher. The South River, swollen from days of rain, gurgled hungrily behind them, its dark water carrying fallen leaves and debris toward the sea. Joggers spotted him caught in the branches along the bank, Captain Reynolds explained, his breath visible in the morning chill. "Would have missed him completely if not for his bright delivery uniform." Sarah nodded, a leaden weight settling in her chest. "It's Doyle." Wallet in his pocket confirms it. Ethan Michael Doyle, 32. Reynolds hesitated. "There's something else. Something you should see." He led her to a folding table where a technician was carefully cataloging items recovered from the body. Among them, a waterlogged smartphone, keys, wallet, and a plastic-wrapped package that had somehow remained intact despite its journey through the river. "Found this in his jacket," Reynolds said, pointing to the package. "Sealed against the water with some kind of heavy-duty plastic. Almost like he knew." Sarah pulled on gloves and carefully unwrapped the outer layer. Inside was a letter in a Ziploc bag, addressed to her in Ethan's now familiar handwriting. Beneath it lay a photograph, similarly protected. "I need a minute," she said quietly. Reynolds nodded, moving away to supervise the loading of the body into the medical examiner's van. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she opened the letter. "Detective Haynes, I promised I would bring someone back home, and I did. You'll find her where children who are lost eventually go, if they're lucky enough to be found by someone who still remembers their names." What happened at 119? Lafayette wasn't just one family's tragedy. It was a door, a way for those with evil in their hearts to make children vanish while everyone looked the other way. Richard Myers didn't work maintenance just at the hospital. Check the school records, the community center, the places where vulnerable children gather. Some chains can't be broken by the living, but the dead hear what the living cannot. Forgive me for what I've done, or thank me. I'm still not sure which is appropriate. Ethan. Sarah lowered the letter, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the November air. She carefully removed the photograph from its protective covering. It showed a young girl, alive, healthy, sitting on a bed in what appeared to be a shelter or residential facility. Her face was thinner than in the hospital photo from 2018, her eyes older than her years, but unmistakably the same child from Ethan's files. Lydia Myers. The photo appeared to have been taken recently, perhaps within the last few days. Sarah turned it over. Written on the back in Ethan's hand, "Safe Haven Youth Shelter, 1422 Hawthorne Street, Room 8. She's finally free." Sarah immediately called the station. "I need officers at Safe Haven Youth Shelter on Hawthorne, now, and tell them not to frighten the children." The medical examiner's preliminary report arrived while Sarah was still processing the implications of the photograph. Ethan Doyle had died by drowning, sometime between midnight and 2 a.m., approximately 5 hours after his disappearance from the doorbell camera footage. No signs of struggle or defensive wounds were present. The ME noted with puzzlement that his body showed evidence of having been in the water for less than 12 hours, despite having been missing for over 6 days. "That's impossible," Sarah muttered, checking the timestamps again. Where was he for nearly a week? More confounding still was the shelter's confirmation. A girl matching Lydia Myers' description had indeed been brought to Safe Haven shortly after midnight on Halloween, mere minutes after the time of death established for Ethan. The intake report noted that she had been left anonymously at their door, wrapped in a blanket and clutching a handwritten note with her name and date of birth. "The timing doesn't work," Sarah told Marcus as they drove toward the shelter. "Ethan drowns in the river, miles from town, but somehow delivers a child to a shelter across the city at almost the same moment?" Marcus shook his head. clearly uncomfortable with the direction their investigation had taken. Maybe the ME's wrong about time of death. Maybe the shelter staff recorded the wrong time. Or maybe something happened that night that doesn't fit neatly into our understanding of possibility, Sarah said quietly, staring out at Salem's historic streets. This was, after all, a city built on foundations of both reason and superstition, where the rational and the inexplicable had coexisted for centuries. Safe Haven. Youth Shelter occupied a renovated Victorian home, not unlike 119 Lafayette in structure, though its cheerful yellow paint and well-tended garden created a vastly different impression. Inside, children's artwork decorated the walls, and the scent of baking cookies wafted from a kitchen where teenagers were being taught basic culinary skills. The director, Dr. Amara Wilson, met them in a small office filled with plants and children's drawings. A compassionate woman in her 50s with silver-streaked braids and a calm presence, she had been running the shelter for over 20 years. Lydia has been with us for 6 days now, Dr. Wilson explained, leafing through a file. Severely traumatized, malnourished, showing signs of prolonged confinement. She barely speaks, though she's begun drawing. She slid a folder across the desk. These might interest you. Inside were dozens of crayon drawings, all depicting the same scenes. A house with a basement window, a small figure inside, and a taller figure approaching with what appeared to be a light or lantern. In the most recent drawings, the small figure was outside the house, holding the taller figure's hand. Has she said anything about who brought her here? Sarah asked. Dr. Wilson shook her head. Only that the delivery man found her. We assumed she meant a package courier saw her abandoned somewhere and brought her to us. She paused. Until yesterday, when she drew this. She handed Sarah a final drawing. Clearly Ethan, rendered with surprising detail, holding a flashlight and writing on a wall. The words he was depicted writing matched exactly the message from the basement. The delivery never ends. May I speak with her? Sarah asked, her throat tight with emotion. Dr. Wilson led them to a small, bright room where a thin girl with cropped hair sat by a window, watching birds at a feeder outside. Though 7 years had passed since her hospital photo, Sarah recognized Lydia immediately. Something in the solemn set of her mouth, the watchful stillness of her posture. Lydia, Dr. Wilson said gently, this is Detective Haynes. She'd like to ask you a few questions about how you came to us, if that's okay. The girl turned, studying Sarah with eyes that seemed to hold decades rather than years. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. Sarah sat across from her, keeping her body language open and non-threatening. Lydia, I'm trying to understand what happened to you, and to a man named Ethan Doyle. Do you know that name? Something flickered in the girl's eyes. Recognition, perhaps even a hint of warmth. She picked up a crayon and wrote on a blank sheet of paper. The delivery man. Yes, Sarah said softly. The delivery man. Did he help you? Lydia wrote again, her letters careful and deliberate. He found me where no one else looked. In the basement at Lafayette Street? Sarah asked. The girl nodded, then wrote, He said my name was too important to stay trapped in the dark. Sarah felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Do you remember how you got here to Safe Haven? For the first time, Lydia spoke aloud, her voice rusty from disuse. He carried me through the rain, said he was making his final delivery. Her fingers twisted in her lap. There were others with us, children I couldn't see but could hear. They were happy someone remembered their names too. Sarah drove back to the station in silence, Lydia's words echoing in her mind. The medical examiner called as she pulled into the parking lot. Detective, something unusual with the Doyle autopsy. The water in his lungs, it's not from South River. Different mineral composition entirely. Almost like he drowned somewhere else and was later placed in the river. Sarah thanked him and hung up, staring at the building where answers were supposed to live. But some questions she was beginning to understand had answers that existed beyond the reach of evidence bags and forensic reports. That evening, she returned to 119 Lafayette Street one last time. Standing on the sidewalk in the gathering dusk, she laid a bouquet of flowers on the front step, 7 white roses for the children in the metal box, and 1 red rose for the delivery driver, who had heard their voices when no one else would listen. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye on the porch, a small, neatly wrapped candy box, identical to the one Ethan had carried that night, still sealed with its original ribbon. A note was attached, for all the children still waiting in the dark. The doorbell camera, which had been reinstalled as part of the investigation, silently recorded Sarah's discovery of the package. It also captured something she didn't see, A fleeting reflection in the darkened window beside the door. Ethan Doyle smiling, a small girl with braided hair beside him, both fading from view as the first streetlight flickered on. 3 weeks after finding Ethan's body, Sarah sat in her car outside Safe Haven Youth Shelter, watching snowflakes dance in the glow of street lamps. The first real snow of the season had transformed Salem into a hushed wonderland, softening the edges of the historic buildings and muffling the sounds of the city. She clutched a small gift bag on her lap, a journal bound in soft leather, wrapped in tissue paper. No official explanation had been provided for what happened at 119 Lafayette Street. The case file remained open but inactive, classified as death by misadventure, with unexplained circumstances. The house itself had been scheduled for demolition in the spring, too many structural issues to salvage, according to the city inspector. But in the absence of official answers, Salem had created its own. Rumors spread about the delivery driver who disappeared on Halloween night and somehow rescued a child who had been missing for 7 years. Street artists had painted murals of a man in a delivery uniform holding a lantern, guiding lost children home. Someone had even started a scholarship fund in Ethan's name for nursing students specializing in pediatric care. Sarah checked her watch, 3:15 p.m. Lydia would be finishing her therapy session soon. In the week since her rescue, the girl had begun the long process of healing, speaking more frequently and sleeping through the night without nightmares. Today would mark their 5th unofficial visit, meetings that existed outside the boundaries of the official investigation. Dr. Wilson had encouraged these visits, noting how Lydia seemed to trust Sarah in a way she didn't trust other adults. Perhaps it was because Sarah had been the one to connect the final pieces of her story, or perhaps it was something deeper, a shared understanding of what it meant to search for someone lost between worlds. The shelter's front door opened, and Dr. Wilson beckoned from the porch. Sarah grabbed the gift bag and hurried through the swirling snow, brushing white flakes from her coat as she entered the warm building. "She's having a good day," Dr. Wilson said, leading Sarah toward the art therapy room. "Made significant progress in her session. Actually talked about what happened in the basement." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What did she say? That her father kept her there after her mother tried to leave with her. That he worked at places where children were vulnerable, schools, hospitals, aftercare programs. Dr. Wilson's voice dropped to a whisper. "She says there were other children sometimes, but they didn't stay long. The police will want a formal statement eventually, but we're taking it slowly." Sarah nodded, well aware that Lydia's testimony might eventually lead to solving multiple missing children cases, and potentially uncovering crimes more extensive than they had initially suspected. Richard Myers had disappeared the same night his wife reported Lydia missing in 2018. Neither had been seen since, though Caroline Myers' car had been found abandoned near the Canadian border. "There's something else," Dr. Wilson added, pausing outside the art room door. "She's been drawing him again, in remarkable detail." Inside the bright room, Lydia sat alone at a table covered with art supplies. Now dressed in jeans and a purple sweater, with her hair growing out into a short bob, she looked more like a typical 12-year-old than the haunted girl from the basement. She looked up as Sarah entered, a small smile flickering across her face. "Hi, Detective Sarah," she said, her voice stronger than during their last visit. "Just Sarah today," Sarah reminded her gently, taking a seat across the table. "I'm not here as a detective." Lydia nodded, returning her attention to the drawing before her. It showed Ethan in his delivery uniform, standing beside what appeared to be the doorway of 119 Lafayette Street. He was writing something on the wall beside the door, the same phrase that had been found in the basement. "The delivery never ends." "That's very detailed," Sarah commented. "You remember him clearly." Lydia nodded, adding careful shading to Ethan's face. "I saw him 3 times before he took me away. Once when I was in the hospital. He was my nurse when Dad hurt my arm." She pointed to a faint scar near her elbow. "Then when I was in the basement, I saw him walking past the window sometimes at night. He would look in, like he was checking on me." Sarah felt a chill despite the room's warmth. According to all accounts, Ethan had no knowledge of 119 Lafayette Street until his final delivery. Yet Lydia's memories suggested otherwise. "The last time," Lydia continued, selecting a blue crayon, "was when he came to the door. Dad was gone. He always left on Halloween to help at the community events." Her voice took on a bitter edge beyond her years. Mom had been gone for a long time by then. "And Ethan came to the door?" Sarah prompted gently. "He had candy. Said someone sent it for me." Lydia's hand stilled over the drawing. "But he already knew my name." Said he'd been looking for me for a long time. She looked up, her eyes suddenly older, wiser. He wasn't scared of the others either. Sarah hesitated. Others? The children who never left the basement, the ones Dad brought home. Lydia's voice became matter of fact, as though discussing something as ordinary as school friends. I could see them, but no one else could, except Ethan. He saw them too. She reached for a new sheet of paper and quickly sketched 7 small figures holding hands in a circle around a central figure. Ethan, recognizable by the uniform. He knew all their names, Lydia said softly, even though some of them had been forgotten for a long time. He said their names out loud, one by one, and each time he did, they looked lighter, happier. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then he said my name, and the door that wasn't there before opened, and he carried me through it. Sarah stared at the drawing, her throat tight with emotion. What door, Lydia? The one in the basement wall, behind the furnace. Lydia continued sketching, adding details to each small figure. A baseball cap here, braided hair there, making each child distinct. It's always been there, but only certain people can see it. People who remember names that everyone else has forgotten. She completed the drawing and pushed it towards Sarah. He said to tell you something. That night before he left me at the shelter. Sarah leaned forward. What did he say? He said, tell Detective Haynes that some deliveries cross boundaries we don't understand. Tell her that names have power, especially the names of forgotten children. And tell her that sometimes, to bring someone back from the dark, you have to be willing to walk into it yourself. Lydia reached across the table, her small hand surprisingly warm against Sarah's cold fingers. He knew you would understand, because of your sister. Sarah froze, her breath catching. My sister? The one who disappeared when you were young, the reason you became a detective. Lydia's eyes held a compassion too profound for her years. He said her name was Emily, and she was 16, and she wore a silver bracelet with stars on it. Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. No one on the force knew about Emily. Sarah had been raised in Seattle, had moved to Salem only after college. Her sister's disappearance had been the defining tragedy of her childhood, but it was a wound she had never shared with colleagues. How could he possibly know that? She whispered. Lydia shrugged, returning to her drawing. He knows all the lost ones' names now. That's his job. She looked up, a small, secretive smile playing at her lips. The delivery never ends, Sarah. It just changes hands. As Sarah drove home through the snow-hushed streets, she found herself taking a detour past 119 Lafayette Street. The house stood dark against the white landscape, windows boarded, police tape still stretched across the porch. Yet as she slowed to a stop, she could have sworn she saw a light flicker briefly in the basement window. Not electric, but the warm glow of a lantern moving slowly past. Her phone chimed with a text notification. Unknown sender. Look in your glove compartment. Heart pounding, Sarah popped open the compartment. Inside, where nothing had been moments before, lay a small silver bracelet with star charms. Emily's bracelet, missing for 25 years. Another text appeared. Some deliveries take longer than others, but they always find their way home eventually. Sarah clutched the bracelet to her chest, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the dark house. For just a moment, in the swirling snow, she thought she saw them. Ethan in his uniform, leading a teenage girl with long brown hair and a familiar smile toward an unseen door. Then they were gone, leaving only undisturbed snowflakes where their footprints should have been. The final text message appeared as the town clock struck midnight. Some chains can't be broken by the living, but the dead hear what the living cannot. The delivery never ends, Sarah. It just finds new messengers. In the days that followed, reports began to surface throughout Salem. Small gifts appearing mysteriously on doorsteps, lost items returned after years of absence, messages delivered from loved ones long gone, and occasionally, in the deepest hours of night, residents would glimpse a figure in a delivery uniform walking purposefully through the snow, lantern in hand, guided by the voices only he could hear. The narrator's voice falls to a whisper as the story concludes. Some deliveries never arrive by the expected path, but they always find their destination. As this tale of courage and sacrifice comes to a close, we're left to wonder about the invisible boundaries that separate our world from the shadows where forgotten souls linger. Ethan Doyle wasn't just a delivery driver making his rounds. He was a messenger between worlds, brave enough to step through a door others couldn't see, carrying the burden of names that everyone else had allowed to fade away. What would you do if you heard the whispers of those who've been abandoned? Would you have the courage to follow them into the dark, knowing you might never return? In our rush through modern life, how many cries do we ignore? How many children stand at windows, hoping someone will remember their names? Detective Sarah discovered that sometimes salvation requires walking willingly into the darkness, that to truly save another, we must be willing to sacrifice part of ourselves. Perhaps the most profound deliveries in life are not packages at all, but rather the moments when we reach across impossible divides to bring someone home who had been lost for far too long. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that they're not forgotten. Follow our channel for more tales that bridge the gap between the seen and unseen worlds. Like, comment, and tell us. Have you ever felt a presence that couldn't be explained? Have you ever found yourself making an unexpected delivery of hope to someone who needed it most? Remember, some chains can't be broken by the living, but compassion and remembrance can reach across all boundaries.